The doorbell tinkled softly as Clara entered the bazaar. The smell of aged wood and old books filled the air, mingling with the dim light from the lamps hanging from the ceiling. To many, this place seemed like nothing more than a disorganized collection of trinkets, but to Clara, it was a treasure chest waiting to be explored. His eyes scanned the shelves filled with objects, antique clocks, delicate porcelain, and faded paintings. However, what caught his attention was a mirror leaning against the corner, almost hidden among velvet boxes. It was tall, with a gilded frame adorned with symbols that looked like letters from an alphabet lost in time. "You like it, don't you?" The voice of the bazaar owner, an elderly man with small glasses, surprised her. "This mirror is special." "Special how?" Clara asked, reaching out to touch the frame. "Let's just say it carries a story that isn't for everyone. One warning: never stare at it at midnight." Clara laughed, thinking it was just a tactic to make him more intriguing. "And why?" The old man just smiled, with a look that mixed pity and mystery. "Some questions don't need answers." Even with the warning, Clara felt she needed to take that mirror. Something about it seemed to call to her. After a brief negotiation, she left the bazaar carrying the object, eager to discover what was so special about it. Clara pushed open the bedroom door, the mirror resting on her shoulder. The setting sun softly illuminated the gilded frame, highlighting the enigmatic symbols engraved upon it. She carefully positioned it in a corner of the room, where she could admire her full reflection for the first time. She sat up in bed and stared at the mirror, noticing how it seemed to catch the light in a peculiar way, almost as if it were glowing from within. "Never stare at midnight," she repeated to herself, remembering the salesman's warning. Curiosity tingled in her mind. As night fell, Clara couldn't concentrate on anything. She tried to read a book, but her hands kept shaking. Instead, she stared at the clock on the wall. The minute hand seemed to drag, each movement echoing like a drum in her mind. When the clock finally struck midnight, Clara couldn't resist. She stood up, walked over to the mirror, and stared into it. At first, nothing seemed different, just her own reflection staring back at her. But then the surface of the mirror began to ripple, like lake water disturbed by a breeze. Her reflection slowly distorted, familiar features morphing into something strange. The reflection's smile widened unnaturally, revealing teeth that were sharper than they should have been. The reflection's smile widened unnaturally, revealing teeth sharper than they should have been. "Do you want to know the future?" the voice whispered, coming from every direction and nowhere. Clara jumped back, her heart racing. When she blinked, the mirror returned to normal, reflecting only her pale face and wide eyes. Trembling, she pulled a sheet over the mirror, trying to dispel the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The next morning, Clara woke up to sunlight streaming through the cracks in the window. For a moment, she thought it had all been a strange dream, but the sheet was still covering the mirror in the corner of the room, and an unsettling feeling hung in the air. "Do you want to know the future?" The memory of the whispered voice made her stomach turn. Trying to shake off her discomfort, Clara decided to ignore the mirror. She spent the day outside, but she couldn't stop her mind from returning to what she had seen the night before. When she returned that night, the room seemed colder than the rest of the house. She stared at the covered mirror, feeling both attracted and repulsed at the same time. After hesitating, she removed the sheet, revealing its gilded frame and seemingly harmless glass. This time, Clara decided to be careful. She stood at a safe distance and glanced briefly at the mirror. Her reflection looked normal, but as she turned to walk away, something caught her eye. In the bottom corner of the glass, she saw a small vision forming, like a movie starting to play. It was her, sitting in the kitchen, knocking over a cup of tea. Moments later, the sound of something breaking echoed through the house. Frightened, she ran into the kitchen and found the cup on the floor, broken into pieces. Over the next few days, the mirror visions became clearer. At first, they were trivial events, like a friend tripping or a phone ringing. But soon the images began to show something darker. A car accident, a violent argument between neighbors, and even an ambulance carrying someone she knew. Each sight made her more uneasy, and she didn't know whether to try to intervene or let fate take its course. The mirror seemed to mock her, showing her fragments she couldn't fully understand. Clara found that the longer she looked, the harder it was to look away. One night, as the clock neared midnight, Clara found herself again before the mirror, unable to resist the lure of its revelations. But this time, the reflection smiled before showing any vision, and the feeling that something was gaining control over her became inescapable. Clara woke with a feeling of emptiness. The events of the past few nights had become an unbearable weight, and she knew she needed answers. The mirror, with its disturbing secrets, seemed more and more like a threat than a harmless object. She called Sophia, her best friend, who had always been fascinated by supernatural stories. When Clara explained what was happening, Sophia was intrigued and agreed to help her unravel the mystery. The two spent hours researching online and in old books that Sophia kept at home. Finally, they found a clue. The symbols were part of a runic alphabet associated with sealing rituals. The mirror's frame was actually a prison for an entity called Helena, a woman who, centuries ago, had used magic to manipulate the future. Helena had been cursed for her actions and trapped in the mirror by magicians of her time. However, the curse had a flaw. It could influence those who looked directly into the mirror, trying to lure them inside and escape. Clara felt a chill as Sophia read about the legend. What if that's what she's trying to do to me? That's exactly it, Sophia replied, frowning. You said the reflection acted independently, right? This means she is connecting to you. The more you look, the stronger she becomes. Desperate, Clara tried to get rid of the mirror. She took it to a storage room and left it there. But when she returned home, it was back in her room, leaning against the corner as if it had never left. That night, the reflection not only smiled, but began to speak to Clara. You've already seen what I'm capable of. Imagine what we could do together. I can give you the future you've always wanted. Clara tried to ignore it, but the temptation to accept it was strong. Each disturbing vision reminded her of her powerlessness over fate, and the mirror promised exactly the opposite. Sophia tried to convince her to fight, but Clara didn't know how long she could resist. The wind howled outside, and the darkness seemed heavier than usual. Clara sat on the floor of her room staring at the mirror. The entity on the other side seemed increasingly impatient, whispering more frequently, its voice soft as silk but full of evil intent. Why do you resist, Clara? The entity asked, her reflection smiling reassuringly. I only want to help you. I showed you the future. Wasn't it helpful? Wasn't it tempting? Clara shook her head, trying to ignore the words. But deep down, they echoed her insecurities and desires. What could she do if she had control over the future? She would prevent tragedies, protect those she loved, achieve the dreams that had always seemed out of reach. At that moment, Sophia entered the room, carrying a thickly covered book. I found something, she said breathlessly. A sealing ritual. It's risky, but it might work. We need to keep the entity in the mirror and sever its connection to you. Clara approached the book, reading the complicated instructions. The ritual required symbols drawn around the mirror, candles arranged in a specific pattern, and most importantly, a personal sacrifice. Clara knew it would be dangerous, but she saw no other way out. As they prepared the ritual, the entity began to laugh, a low, guttural laugh that seemed to fill the room. Do you think you can defeat me? It asked, its voice reverberating. I am the future. I am inevitable. As the clock struck midnight, Clara and Sophia began the ritual. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the room. Clara drew symbols on the mirror's frame with trembling hands, while Sophia recited ancient words that seemed to echo off the walls. The entity began to struggle. The mirror pulsed with a dark light, and Clara's reflection became a horrific, distorted version of herself. The energy in the room was suffocating, and Sophia was thrown against the wall, leaving Clara alone to finish the ritual. With tears streaming down her face, Clara screamed the final words. An intense light filled the room, and the entity let out a deafening scream as it was sucked back into the mirror. But at the last moment, the reflection smiled. Silence filled the room as the bright light disappeared. Clara knelt on the floor panting while the mirror lay in the corner, now lifeless. Its surface reflected only the empty room, without distortion or whispers. Sophia stood up with difficulty, holding her injured arm. "Did we do it?" she asked, looking at Clara, who seemed frozen in place. Clara didn't answer right away. She approached the mirror slowly, afraid of what she might find. She touched the golden frame, now cold to the touch, and stared at her reflection. But something was wrong. "My reflection," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. In the glass, she could no longer see herself. Only emptiness stared back. The entity had been sealed away, but as a result, Clara had lost the ability to see her own image. It was the price she had paid to save herself and the others. Sophia held Clara's shoulder, trying to comfort her. "You did what you had to do. You saved us all." Clara nodded, but the weight of the sacrifice was crushing. She would no longer know who she really was, only how others saw her. "Now, we need to get rid of this forever," Sophia said, pointing to the mirror. The two of them took the object to the attic of an old house and locked it in a trunk. But Clara knew that somehow the mirror would never be completely gone. Months later, Clara tried to rebuild her life. Although the visions and whispers had disappeared, she still felt the presence of the entity in moments of absolute silence, like a ghost in her consciousness. To stay up to date with news and learn about other supernatural stories, like the video and subscribe to the channel.